Everything that you love or hate about your ball flight happens in a space smaller than your thumb. Move the strike a few millimeters and adjust the club face by half a degree, and the shot goes from the trees into the fairway. Give me a little bit of your time and I'll teach you the skills that control that impact window and simple practice habits to help fix them so that you never feel completely lost again with your golf swing. Hi, my name is Jon Sherman. I'm the author of the best-selling book, The 4 Foundations of Golf. And on this channel, I'm teaching you how to play golf, not golf swing. So golfers get stuck looking in all the wrong places when they're struggling. They're trying to fix the symptom, but I'm going to teach you how to fix the cause. Now, you've heard terms like club path, angle of attack, face angle, dynamic loft, and club head speed. These are all the elements that give the golf ball its marching orders to determine how far, how high, how it's curving, and the stopping power on greens. But to keep golf simple, you mostly need to think about 3 of them. You should be obsessed with them. Every shot you hit on the range and on the course, on some level, you should be monitoring these big 3. These should be your ball striking religion because they have the most influence on your scoring potential. So for every golf ball you hit, ask these 3 questions. How did I strike it on the club face? Did I start the ball on my intended line? And how was my turf interaction? An obsessive focus on these 3 skills, impact location, club face control, and ground contact, are how you get to the promised land in your golf game. This is how you keep more tee shots in play, hit more greens in regulation, and have a more functional wedge game. For the past decade, these have been my guiding light in my golf swing. It's how I went from having a fairly wild golf swing that struggled quite a bit to becoming a plus handicap, a better tournament player, winning club championships, and even a USGA medal. And trust me when I say that all of these things seemed very far-fetched beforehand. Along the way, I never felt like my golf swing really fell apart or I was too far away from being functional, which is a word I love to use. Because when you focus on the skills that matter, and more importantly, use them as feedback when you practice and on the course, you don't waste time answering the wrong questions. Now, I'm never going to watch 50 videos on the golf swing because I know the answer lies within focusing on 1 or 2 of these skills to get back to functional territory. And you can too. Now let's start with the skill that holds most higher handicaps from breaking 100, 90, or even 80 impact location. Now, if I asked most golfers to tell me where they hit the ball on the club face on each shot, they would likely not be able to tell me if it was on the heel, the toe, or even higher or lower on the face. But for every golfer who is serious about lowering their scores, they should be working on it. And it's really quite simple. You've heard me say it a million times, but get yourself a can of Dr. Scholl's Odorex spray. Spray the face of the club when you practice and start to visually see where you're making impact. And then make the connection in your hands. Was that strike more towards the toe or the heel or even higher or lower on the face? Then start to diagnose your tendencies and look for patterns and challenge yourself to do the opposite. For me, when I'm striking it too close to the heel of the club, I try and move it to the toe of the club. And then I'm monitoring my intent on each swing and what I'm trying to do with my body to achieve that goal. And more importantly, I'm keeping track if I'm actually doing it. I swear I'm not exaggerating, but if most golfers obsessed only on impact location when they practice and on the course, you can see a major drop in your scores. This is how you hit longer, straighter drives, more iron shots that reach the green, and crisper wedge shots with stopping power. Why? Because you're striking the ball closer to the center of gravity of the club, also known as the sweet spot. When you do that, you're allowing the club to do what it's designed to do. And you optimize things like spin rate, launch angle, and ball speed. This solves so many problems, and you don't need to go through a swing overhaul either. You are simply just trying to be an athlete and focusing on one job. Now let me quickly tell you how I'm taking care of the big 3 of my health with Grüns gummies, and I want to thank them for sponsoring this video. Grüns are a convenient, comprehensive formula packed into a snack pack a day. This isn't a multivitamin or a greens gummy or even a prebiotic. It's all of those things and then some at a fraction of the price. And a bonus, these things actually taste great. Now, I try and eat healthy, but I'm not perfect. So these gummies are a great way to fill the gaps and help support sustained energy, recover from my workouts, and keep my mind sharp so I can keep coming up with these helpful YouTube videos for all of you. Grunes contains 3 times the amount of dietary fiber compared to other leading greens powders. You're getting 100% of daily values of some of the most important vitamins like vitamin C and vitamin D. And they're also loaded with essential minerals like zinc and super mushrooms that help promote brain and gut health. To be honest, I've tried some of the other brands out there and I couldn't stick with the daily habit because they tasted gross. If you want to try them out and get up to a 52% discount, click the link in the description of this video. Now let's get back to fixing your impact location. Now last year, a golfer came to me suffering from the shanks. He had been to 3 swing instructors but had not figured out the issue. So I asked him a simple question: had he done impact training? He asked me what it was because he had never even thought about it. So I gave him my whole little speech, told him to try and strike the toe and keep track of his results. A few days later, he called me with incredible joy in his voice and felt hopeful for the first time in months. And luckily he's gotten past this issue now. Now, a lot of golfers never consider something as simple as this, but it really can be powerful. Now, I'll go more into detail on the physics of impact location and how you can train for it in another video, but now this is your basic task. Just keep track of it when you practice. Make the connection between what you feel in your hands and the reality of where you struck it on the face with that foot spray. Challenge yourself to strike different parts of the club face. This is literally one of the best practice methods out there. And then have a keen awareness of your patterns on the golf course the best you can. What you want to do is use that feedback and at the end of the round say, I was mostly striking it on the toe today with my irons, or maybe too high on the face or low on the face with my wedges. And then use that feedback loop to make your practice sessions more effective. Now let's move on to the next skill that explains why one pro golfer can earn $5 million and then the other can't make a cut: club face control. So impact location solves a lot of the north and south questions in golf. Think of like how far you hit it off the tee and your distance control with your irons and your wedges. But the other big scoring differential is with your east and west, or in other words, the left to right dispersion of your shots. I don't have to tell you this, but if you spray your tee shots way too far to the left or way too far to the right, you simply can't score. Errant drives are statistically the #1 reason for golfers making double bogeys or worse, which is really what separates one handicap level from the next. And that's why club face control is arguably the top skill for scoring once you start to reasonably control your impact location. Where your club face points at impact is the glue of your swing, and it accounts for about 65 to 80% of the direction of where the ball starts. So for a right-handed golfer, if the club face is way too open, you're going to miss it to the right, and vice versa for a closed club face. And even more importantly, how it matches up with your club path determines how it curves through the air, whether that's a hook, slice, or a tight draw or fade. Now, club path is a really important part of the equation, but let me tell you a quick personal story on how club face control can make any club path work. For years, I had a really extreme in to out swing path. It could go as much as 8 to 12 degrees in to out, depending on which club in my bag I was using. Now, most instructors would tell you that anything past 6 degrees starts to become extreme, and it will make golf harder because of excessive curvature. And they're mostly right. So because my club path was in to out, I was a draw player. And when it would get more extreme, I would fight these massive hooks. Now, despite that, I was able to get down to a 2 handicap and then eventually scratch with this crazy club path. Why? Because I worked really hard on controlling where my club face was pointing at impact. For me, having a face that was more open at impact and using that as a deep focus throughout my swing enabled me to get the club pointing somewhere between my target and my club path to hit that functional draw. And when I was hitting these massive pull hooks too much, I simply worked on feels that would open up the club face a bit. Conversely, when I was hitting shots straight to the right or even push fades, I knew that the face was way too open and I had to find a way to close it. Now, I know that sounds incredibly simple, but that's all I thought about when I practiced, and it's all I paid attention to when I played on the golf course. I kept developing what I would call internal reference points on my club face awareness. so that when it was too closed, I would open it a bit, and when it was too open, I just closed it a bit. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Now for me, this had a lot to do with the perceived rotation of my trail forearm. Or sometimes the cue would be leaving the club face really open at address and keeping it that way during my swing to exaggerate against the pull hook. But because I kept my attention so much on club face awareness, I was able to play some pretty good golf when things even got out of whack. Now long term, I did work on my club path, but that took many years to get to a point where I'm starting to get closer to neutral. But along the way, my swing never really fell apart because of my obsession with club face awareness. Every golfer should be doing the same thing on some level. Scottie Scheffler is literally the king of club face control, and his coach Randy Smith has been quoted as saying it's all they trained for starting back when he was a junior player. Now, when you're practicing, you have to challenge yourself to start the ball in different directions, particularly in the opposite of your fault. Now, for all you slicers who get the face way too open to impact, you're hitting your shots that start right and then curve even further right. You need to find to experiment with what it takes to close the club face and start the ball more left of your target. Now to do this, you might need to tinker with your grip, perhaps making it stronger, or even your alignment, or finding some type of cue in your golf swing like I did with my trail forearm. Now getting swing lessons can definitely help here, but you have to challenge your instructor to get to the very simple question: what can we do in my swing to get more club face awareness and, more importantly, control? But this journey is never going to end. As you get better at this game, it's largely one big exercise of managing where your club face is pointing at impact. This is the thing that changes the most from round to round, and this maintenance never stops. Now, as a general rule of thumb, most golfers have way more consistent club paths than how they present the club face at impact. And if you can even get just slightly better at this, I guarantee you that your scores are going to drop significantly by keeping more tee shots in play, more approach shots on target. Now let's move to the last piece of the puzzle that is holding so many high to mid handicap golfers from breaking through: ground contact. If there's one skill that separates skilled golfers from the rest of the pack, it is ground contact. When and where the sole first meets the turf relative to the golf ball helps decide your launch, spin rate, and most importantly, your front to back distance control. If you can tighten this up a bit, a lot of those awful iron and wedge shots will start disappearing. Now, golfers can struggle in two ends of the spectrum. They can initiate contact with the ground way too far behind the ball. You'll either chunk it or start trapping a lot of grass and debris between the club and the ball, which leads to less than optimal launch conditions. Translation: the number one error shows up. You are not getting the ball to the green with your irons or your wedges. Now, the other end of the spectrum is when golfers don't even make contact with the ground at all and they pick up a bit and hit those nasty thin shots. Now, to play great golf, you don't need to take beaver pelt divots. For most golfers, they just don't have the swing speed to do that. But if you can get your golf club interacting with the turf a little bit better around the ball, this is a big time score reducer. There is a huge correlation with better ground contact and handicap level. However, the problem is golfers never really get good feedback on ground contact because they're practicing on artificial turf, and as a result, they just can't work on it that well. But let me show you a few ways to get around this. Generally speaking, you can use impact location to help diagnose ground contact issues, which is another reason you should be keeping track of it. And when golfers hit really far behind the ball on mats, they get a lot of false confidence because the club is gonna bounce up a bit and they can still hit decent shots. But if they were on the golf course, they would have chunked it and the ball would go nowhere. I remember as a junior golfer, this would drive me absolutely nuts on the course because I was getting all of that false feedback from range mats and then chunking irons on the golf course. So when you are practicing on mats and you start seeing strikes that are higher on the face, that's usually a really good proxy for a shot that probably would have been heavy on the course because you hit too far behind the ball. Vice versa, if they're too low on the club face, then you've got the opposite ground contact issue, and you're pulling up a bit. Now, your best shots are typically going to live on about that third or fourth groove on the club face. Now, if you want even better feedback on ground contact, I'd recommend getting a training aid called the divot board. It's one of the few that I come across that I think is relevant for all golfers, and it's been really helpful to me over several years because I'm mostly practicing on artificial turf as well. But if you do have access to a grass range, I would recommend using some type of visual reference point like a tee where you can place where your golf ball is. Now, grass divots can be a little misleading sometimes, but you're mostly looking for patterns of turf interaction too far behind the ball or not at all. And if you want a really extreme challenge when you practice, try and hit out of bunkers and draw a line in the sand to see where your club is initiating contact with the ground. That might be the best feedback and most challenging of all. But when you isolate this skill and pay very close attention to feedback, some really interesting things can happen. For example, my tendency is to get a little thin sometimes and not make good contact with the ground at all. So a cue for me is to keep my weight and pressure a little bit more exaggerated on the lead side throughout my iron and wedge swing to get more ball first and then ground contact. A lot of golfers struggle with the opposite, where they get trapped too far behind the ball in their swing and their low point is way too far behind the ball as well. That's where you get those chunks from. So whether you use a tool like the divot board or even place a piece of tape on the ground as a reference point, you have to challenge yourself to start moving your ground contact to different places like you would with impact location or club face control. You can start experimenting with small adjustments like ball position, your weight transfer, and experimenting with those to see if they meaningfully change your ground contact. And then the more you pay attention to it, the more you'll be able to pick up on the clues on the golf course and, more importantly, adjust when you need it. But the end goal is obviously to make good contact with the ball first and then have your irons or wedge interact with the turf. Now, obviously golf can get way more complicated than the three things I've been talking about in this video, but it doesn't matter if you're a 30 handicap or even a 5 handicap. Your best ball striking will come from these three variables: impact location, club face control, and ground contact. The more you pay attention to them and, more importantly, collect the right feedback, you can then isolate the issue and work on building that singular skill. Now, this doesn't mean you shouldn't get swing lessons or work on anything else in your golf game, but there is literally nothing more important than these three things at impact. So obviously I couldn't cover everything in this video, and my goal is to tackle each topic more in depth in future videos on this channel, but we also have tons and tons of episodes on the podcast that I co-host with Adam Young called The Sweet Spot, where we're constantly talking about these big three and giving you more ideas on how to get better at them. It's really the theme of our entire show, and thousands of golfers have gotten better by joining our little ball striking religion. So I'm going to link to the episode in the description where we go over the big three in more depth, and then you can go through our entire catalog of over 150 podcast episodes if you want to. And don't miss my last video where I teach you how to stop being such a control freak on the golf course.